Yat A, my relatives, good morning. Today is Saturday, April 23rd, and I wanted to give you the first of my monthly updates for April. And I want to talk about my schedule here in Patreon for the rest of the month, as well as go over some of the public events I have coming up in the next few weeks. So I'll start with my Patreon schedule. As you know, on Patreon, we have 4 tiers, and the basic tier, the starter tier, is called my supporter tier. And for $5 a month, you get ad-free versions of my Second Cups of Coffee, as well as audio versions of my Second Cup of Coffee that you can download and listen to, almost like a podcast. And so one of the things I'm excited about is we like to have guests on our Second Cups of Coffee occasionally. And next week on Thursday, April 28th, one of my guests for that week will be Jim Bear Jacobs. Jim Bear Jacobs is a really good friend of mine. I've known him for a number of years, and he is doing some fantastic work in the Twin City areas and even around Minnesota in general. I'm going to read part of his bio because I don't want to miss anything. He was born in St. Paul. He is a member of the Stockbridge Munsee Mohican Nation. He is a parish associate at the Church of All Nations, which is a fantastic church. We'll talk more about that later, probably, in the Twin Cities area. And he is a cultural facilitator in the Twin Cities and works to raise public's awareness of the American Indian causes and injustices. He is the founder, convener of Healing Minnesota Stories, which is an initiative dedicated to creating events of dialogue, education, and healing, particularly within faith communities. And he is currently the director of racial justice for the Minnesota Council of Churches. Jim Bear also began what is known as sacred site tours. And these are tours led by Reverend Jim Bear Jacobs and Bob Cunderland, who is of the Dakota Nation. And the tours offer an opportunity to learn about Minnesota's history from Native perspective through storytelling and experiencing the sites in silence, meditation, and reflection. I am so thrilled that Jim Bear is going to be a guest on my Second Cup of Coffee next week. And I hope that you'll be able to tune in and watch that live, or at least catch the ad-free version on my Patreon, which you get through becoming a subscriber at the supporter level. So that's the first thing I have on my schedule for next week. The second level, the second tier of my Patreon is called the Ask Questions tier. And that tier gives you 2 Q&As a month. One Q&A with me to basically ask questions about Unsettling Truths, which is the book I co-authored, my lectures on the Doctrine of Discovery, things we talk about over my Second Cups of Coffee, are things even coming out of the campaign I ran back in 2020. And so that first Q&A with myself is going to be on Monday, April 25th, and that will be at noon Eastern Time. And so everyone who is a member of my Ask Questions tier, which is a $10 subscription, you'll be able to join a Zoom call with me at noon on Monday, April 25th, and we'll have about a 45-minute to an hour-long Q&A, and you can ask me whatever questions you want. If you're not able to join that live, feel free to email me a question or message to me here on Patreon, and I'll do my best to get that question answered during that time. I actually have one question already that's been submitted to me, and I'm looking forward to the dialogue that's going to bring forward. The second Q&A we have each month for my Ask Questions tier is with one of my guests. And so this month in April, and this will be on April 28th, my guest for the Q&A is going to be Jim Bear Jacobs. So we're going to have the Second Cup of Coffee, and that will be public on YouTube and Facebook. And then we'll go directly after that, about 15 minutes later, into a Q&A. And members of the Ask Questions tier will be able to have a Q&A with myself and Jim Bear, talking about his work and the fantastic things that he's doing in Minnesota. The third tier of my Patreon, the Join the Conversation tier, that tier gets a lecture once a month. And in the past, we've done lectures on the trauma of white America. We've done lectures on Christian nationalism. And this month, our lecture is on the myth of American exceptionalism. And that lecture will be live streamed. It will happen on a Zoom call. And so members of the Join the Conversation tier will be able to join that lecture live if you would like to, or they can also watch it archived on my Patreon. But that will be on Tuesday, April 26th at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. So if you're a member of my Join the Conversation tier, the lecture on American exceptionalism will be on Tuesday, April 26th at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And what I do is I mail out the links to that Zoom call prior to that so that you can join me live for that. And we also follow that lecture up with a Q&A. And so you can also be a part of that. The fourth tier that I have on my Patreon is the Unsettling Truth tier. And this tier offers a virtual book study with myself and my co-author, Soong-Chan. We're going through chapter by chapter our book, Unsettling Truth, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery. And this month, we are going through chapter 3. And chapter 3 is about how the kingdom of God is not about empire, but about relationships. And we begin looking at the question of how did the Christian church get from the teachings of Jesus, who said things like love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, how to get from that to a doctrine of discovery that literally said you can kill people who don't look like, act like, worship like, or behave like you do. And so that virtual book study will be on Thursday, this coming Thursday, April 28th at 1:15 p.m. It's an hour-long study, and members of the Unsettling Truth tier, that's a $35 subscription, they will have the ability to both join that study live or watch it archived on my Patreon. And they'll also follow up that study with a Q&A. And so if you would like to be a part of that this month, you can obviously subscribe to me on Patreon, or if you're already a part of Patreon, you will have access to that, and that will happen on a Zoom link, and I'll send that link out earlier next week. Then I wanted to go over some of my public events. And so I have 3 public events that are coming up. These all are happening in May. The first is on Sunday, May 1st. I'm going to be interviewed on a show called Abolish Today. I was actually interviewed by them during my campaign for president in 2020, and they saw the second cup of coffee that I did maybe about a week ago about, I think I did it last Monday, where I talked about what do they call it? Emancipation Day here in DC. And I read parts of that act, the Emancipation Act of 1862, and I discussed how that act should more aptly be named the White Reparations and Black Incarceration Act of 1862. And so when Abolition Today saw my second cup of coffee, they wanted to interview me again on their weekly podcast. And so that is online. It's at abolitiontoday.org. You'll be able to get that podcast, but we're recording that. And I think it goes live. I'm not positive. I think it goes live. And that'll be on Sunday, May 1st at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, the other thing I'm doing beginning this next month is I'm beginning an Unsettling Truth book tour. So because Unsettling Truth, this is the book I co-authored with my good friend Soong-Chan, because that book came out during my campaign for president, and then it was immediately followed just a few months later by the pandemic, we never really had a book tour. Soong-Chan and I did a few events together. We did one in Chicago. We did one I did one here in DC. But we really didn't have a book tour where we could travel the nation and talk about our book and really try to promote it. And so Soong-Chan's not able to join me, but I'm actually beginning to schedule and line up book events around the country. Most of them are unpaid, so I'm not getting honorariums for this, but I'm just contacting partners and friends and people who want to help me promote the book. And so on Tuesday, May 3rd at 6:30 p.m., we are going to be in New York City, and we're going to be at a place called the Hub in New York City. It's at 109 East 31st Street, and we'll be there from 6:30 to 8:30. And so I'm going to give about a 45-minute to an hour-long presentation on the book, talking about some of the content of the book, some stories behind writing the book, and even expanding on a few sections. And then we'll have the book for sale, or people can bring copies they already have, and I'm happy to sign books for people. But we'll be doing that in New York City on May 3rd at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And then I'm also traveling to Portland, Oregon. I'm going there for another purpose, for some meetings that I'm going to have there. But while I'm in Portland, one of my a friend, someone who I met actually here on Patreon, who's heard me speak before, has offered to help me plan a book event there. And so on Monday, and this will be on May 16th, we will be having a Unsettling Truths book tour event in Portland, Oregon. I don't have the address for that event yet, but it is planned for Monday, May 16th at 6 p.m. Pacific time. I do not know if these events will be live streamed or recorded, but I am trying to set these up all around the country, and beginning in May, going through most of the summer, even into the fall. So if you're in a city, if you're somewhere around the country and you would love to help me host a book tour event in your city, reach out to me by all means. If you're a subscriber here on Patreon, message me on Patreon. If you're follow me on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, DM me and let me know. I would love to at least look at the options of trying to schedule some book events in your location so we can really get the message of Unsettling Truths out there and hopefully help it become a much bigger piece of the national dialogue. So those are my upcoming scheduled events, both here on Patreon as well as some of my public events. I am deeply grateful for everyone who supports and works with me to help move this conversation forward. I want to thank all of my Patreon subscribers. Thank you for being a part of this important work. And I'm looking forward to this next week where we have a lot of engagement here on Patreon. So yeah, my relatives, hope you have a great weekend. I'm looking forward to the conversations next week. And hakko on that.